In 1896, Eduard Bernstein, a leading theorist of the German Social Democratic Party, urged a revision of the original Marxist program of the party. Bernstein argued that capitalism developed into a very different direction from the one indicated by Marx. Capitalism had not collapsed, but changed and matured. Bernstein recommended to abandon the idea of the proletariat revolution. He suggested that the Social Democrats should carry out the reforms within the parliamentary system. The situation was rather the contrary in Central and Eastern Europe. New ideologies, communism and fascism, became popular in Central and Eastern Europe in the latter part of the 19th century. This was because economic and industrial changes were too little to generate radical social change. But at the same time, economic and technological advances were too rapid. Partial economic success in Central and Eastern Europe underlined the obsolete character of the traditional ruling elite. It was also a breeding ground for new extreme ideologies. Marxism evolved to be a quasi-religion of the emerging workers' movement. It mobilized millions from trade unions to create social democratic parties. In 1914, the German Social Democratic Party had more than 1 million members. At the same time, trade unions had 2 million members only in Germany. These formed an alliance, and in 1912 they won over a third of the votes and became the largest political party in the German parliament. Marxism became very popular in Central and Eastern Europe. Several reasons contributed to this: miserable living conditions, minority oppression in multinational states, millions of landless peasants, lack of democracy, autocratic government, and so on. Interestingly, backward capitalism in Central and Eastern Europe was combined with a very strong workers' movement. Central and Eastern Europe evolved to be a hotbed of revolutionary ideas. In Russia, the Narodnaya Volia, People's Will, a terrorist movement, conducted individual self-sacrificing terrorist acts. Narodnaya Volia terrorists assassinated Tsar Alexander II in 1881, the Minister of Education in 1901, and the Minister of Interior in 1902. The individual acts of the Narodnaya Volia were combined with a growing tension among the laboring masses. For example, on January 22, 1905, during the Japanese-Russian War, Russian troops opened fire on tens of thousands of demonstrators who were marching peacefully toward the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. This massacre triggered strikes and peasant revolts throughout the country. A general strike paralyzed transportation. Delegates of the strike committees formed workers' councils called Soviets. As a result, moderate reforms were initiated, but eventually the Duma, the principal legislative assembly, was dissolved. First, the Tsar dissolved the Duma because land reforms and the emancipation of Jews were demanded. Later, the Social Revolutionary and Social Democratic parties gained majority in the Duma that was unacceptable for the Tsar. In Russia, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, all as known to billions Lenin, did not believe in peaceful reforms within the parliamentary system. Lenin argued for a proletariat socialist revolution in Russia. According to Lenin and Leon Trotsky, revolution in Russia would be a permanent revolution, and it would trigger revolutions in Western Europe. Lenin's concept was drastically different from Marx. According to Marx, the highest level of capitalistic development creates the necessary preconditions for a proletarian revolution. Lenin thought the revolution must be carried out to create the preconditions of socialism. Imperialism was another important pillar of Lenin's communist concept. Nikolai Bukharin, a Vienna-trained economist and Bolshevik theoretician, believed that the world economy was internationalizing into a single integrated system. According to Bukharin, In the new globalized world system, even agrarian peripheries would become part of the capitalist world system. This was a revolutionary thought at the time, but Bukharin warned of the dangers of globalization. Together with the internationalization of the economy and capital, there is also an emerging national and nationalizing trend, said Bukharin. As a reaction to internationalization, Bukharin predicted the protection of national markets, the extraordinary growth of militarism, and the mad hurricane of world wars. In such chaotic times, Leninism would provide ideological background for revolutions in backward countries. These revolutions would fight against the entire capitalist world order. The rejection of Western democratic norms was also typical to the rapidly developing Russian communist ideology. Lenin refused the infantile playing at democratic forums, as he put it. He urged the creation of a military disciplined party, the vanguard of the militant Marxists. The party would have a central importance to organize the masses. Elected bodies would control the party, and the party would control the country. After the revolution, Lenin called at the 10th Party Congress in 1921 for the unity of the party, for iron discipline, for the complete elimination of factionalism. Lenin's concept of a centralist, military-type party was rejected by most Western socialists. In contrast, Leninist ideas found fertile soil in Central and Eastern Europe. Wartime misery, the loss of millions of lives led to Russia to the first revolutionary explosions in Europe. On February 23, 1917, spontaneous demonstrations began in Petrograd, St. Petersburg. After 3 days of demonstrations, the police opened fire. The army was brought in, but they joined the demonstrators. The new government represented the interest of the Russian elite, and they wanted to conclude the war in a way they could keep the empire intact. The revolutionary masses, however, wanted to stop the war immediately. They also demanded, for instance, social reforms. In April 1917, Lenin arrived back from exile and published the April Theses in the Pravda. He proclaimed that the Russian Revolution was passing from its first bourgeois stage to radicalized second proletarian stage. Open confrontation broke out in July 1917, and that led to the Bolshevik Russian October Revolution on October 25, 1917. Soon private trade and private ownership was abolished. By November 1920, all firms employing more than 5 workers were nationalized. Shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution, food shortage erupted. Food redistribution was centralized. Food surpluses of peasants were confiscated by armed units and redistributed by the state. Labor was militarized. Compulsory labor became a general practice both for women and for men. About 280,000 people were sent to construction and mining projects. In general, production and distributions were planned, and most services became free of charge. An in-kind economy was established. This was, however, the result of intolerable inflation in Russia, rather than planning. Money did not play any role in the economy between 1918 and 1920. It was easy to predict that war communism became a complete failure.